Well, today at Solus Partners, we are proud to present Neil with Carlton Advisors. Neil, I appreciate you joining Solus Partners. And just to remind the audience, which largely consists of emerging B2B AI as well as general tech solutions, Solus Partners acts as typically as a go-to-market strategic advisor. So kind of thinking that Series A to C range around where product market fit has been somewhat identified, but we usually will help groups think of systematic ways to approach markets so that you can have repeatable and scalable revenue within a defined SaaS profile. So usually we like to focus on the revenue growth out the gate, but then can advise around scaling CFO and reporting capabilities beyond that, which
Got it.
seems to nicely align with your background and experience.
Excellent. No, that's very helpful, Steve. Thanks for that.
Sure. Well, Neil, we'd love to just hear a little bit about your story and some of the insights that you've gained along the way.
Sure. Happy to do that. Carlton Advisors is a firm that I started in 2024, really to be a guide and Sherpa for ambitious companies that are looking to help with corporate strategy and with scale factors. So it's really leveraging my experience as a serial entrepreneur and as a corporate executive, chief commercial officer, mostly for very rapidly growing small to mid-sized companies, shepherding some acquisitions and happily shepherding a number of successful exits.
What, in terms of that variety, which seems pretty extensive, what do you find the most fulfillment, and maybe what are some of the notable experiences along that path?
So there have been a number of companies that I was fortunate to take from about $50 to $250 million. I've started a company from scratch that we took public and at its high water mark had market cap of around $2 billion. And I know, Steve, you wanted to talk a little bit more about Hain in depth as we go forward. And
Certainly.
had the opportunity several years ago to help a services company transform into a product business and leverage their market position as a market leader in the financial services information business to finally sell the company to its largest competitor for about 5 times revenue. We sold the company for about $220 million. So there have been a couple of, I also have some stock options that are now wallpaper instead of walls. So we've had our share of ups and downs along the way, which I actually think is really important to my practice in bringing, if you will, the wisdom of failure along with some happy successes into helping people kind of manage their way through the minefield.
Certainly. Well, no one bats 1,000, but sometimes the toughest lessons have the best ROI.
Indeed.
In terms of that journey up to about 250 million, how did you guys pull it off, and how did you even think about identifying that path or strategy back then?
So this was a commodity trading company that did a couple of things really, really well. One of them was differentiating ourselves in the marketplace because commodities, this was a paper business, and we were brokering and selling and distributing fine paper products. We niched down very early and focused on a very small segment of the market. We didn't try to be all things to all people. And we were very successful in helping paper manufacturers, more so than our customers. We were actually very, very helpful in helping paper manufacturers penetrate the New York book publishing market and really help create a marketplace for them that was very stable, where we were under contract with about 15 different paper manufacturers, and we were selling paper to about 150 different customers. Along the way, we developed a relationship with a very large European manufacturer of paper who wanted to establish a presence in the U.S. They decided that they wanted to do a joint venture with us because of our presence in the market. So about half of that growth from 50 to 250, about half of that was the result of a strategic partnership with a very large paper manufacturer in Europe, where we were essentially their exclusive outlet into the United States. And that came about because of our market position within the space where they selected us to be their partner.
I mean, it's always great to have a hand like that, especially within Europe to US based sales. But I'm curious, how did you guys think about at the time organic versus M&A driven growth?
We were mostly focused on organic growth. I was with this company for about 9 years. It was not, we grew significantly, and there were definitely some fits and starts along the way. But most of our focus was on building organic growth, which was really identifying and bringing on board best of class salespeople, and little by little engaging with paper manufacturers, who were all very, very large companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, engaging with them sort of on a targeted basis, one or two at a time, one or two a year, and developing relationships with them where we would be really important to them and their business. So we weren't, we were trying to be really important and like meaningful to a relatively small array of partners. And that drove a lot of our organic growth, because the paper market is very volatile, long life cycles to, there's a long distance between market top and market bottom in the paper business. It's like a lot of commodities where supply and demand gets out of line, and it takes a long time for it to come back into line because it takes years to build new capacity. So when we were in a position where there was relatively low supply and high demand, or normal demand and low supply for paper, we were getting a lot of, if you will, extra allocation from our paper manufacturers. They were prioritizing us versus some of our competitors because of the relationships that we had with them and the relationships that we built. So the more important we were to them, the better it was for us when times got tight and they were like, we don't have enough to go around, but we'll make sure we have enough for you. That was again, when prices were rising, when the sellers had pricing power and we had some pricing power along with them, having extra allocation at a moment in time when your margins are 30% higher than they were yesterday makes all the difference in the world in a business where your normal margins are 3 or 4%.
Makes a ton of sense. And I mean, hats off to you guys to identify that almost Porter-like lens around just the supply dynamics.
Yeah, look, I think it's helped me, and I think it's helped a lot of the companies along the way, that this whole notion of niching down, be meaningful to your suppliers and customers. This being all things to all people, and like, there's so much business out there that I'm turning away by niching down and focusing on a vertical. If you're a SaaS software company, and being very intentional about the vertical you want to serve, you're going to be so much more successful than if you try to spread yourself too thin and not be really capable and really important to your market constituents.
It makes a ton of sense. I'd be curious also, was there a certain profile, or how did you evaluate and identify that key sales talent when you were growing that organization?
That's a touch and feel thing. Very often we were looking to bring on board people who had an established reputation, an established book in the business. I mean, we very often, we were not buying the business, but we were actually very good at attracting some high-performing talent, because the market knew, and again, it's a relatively small market. There are not that many players, even in a big city like New York. The market knew that we were making a difference and we were having an impact and we were important, so we were attracting that talent to our company. Some folks were relatively young, just young, hungry salespeople, and others were people with expertise and relationships with a subsector of the business that we wanted to enter. And so we were bringing salespeople on who had relationships within a part of the business that we wanted to be involved with.
Makes a ton of sense, but I think it also speaks to then the experience needed to really expand out a sales function, especially for early stage founders. What advice would you have for founders that are looking, maybe they're just at the first million in ARR, they've got some defined sales motions, but largely need to fill their bench? What would be some advice in that situation for them?
In terms of what, Steve? In terms of growing their sales capability, or
Correct.
That's a tough one, because so much of that depends on context. Without knowing anything about the lens through which a company is looking at their business, it's hard to give a specific answer to the general question. because where they are in the life cycle of how much product market fit, how well they've niched down, how well differentiated they are. There are some things about strategic differentiation that probably, that are sort of you touched on it in your intro, sort of a precursor to how you go about expanding a sales function. A lot of that depends on what it is you're selling and how well differentiated you are, how much pricing power you have, where you look for your salespeople, what are you trying to accomplish with your sales team and your marketing function. There's this, when I go into a business to do particularly performance improvement within a company, what different stages of the life cycle, product market fit is a key consideration for early stage companies. More mature companies, the focus tends to be on scale factors and capital management, access to capital, where are you going to find it? So much of it depends on where you fall on the S curve and where you fall in your life cycle to determine what to prioritize in driving performance improvement for value creation.
I think that's really a great list of considerations that I think could apply for a lot of different categories and stages, but obviously uniquely so. So I appreciate the context. Well, I also would love to get into a little bit of the story around how you guys almost led this, I think would probably be one of the first SPACs ever, and how you guys came up with that.
Essentially what we did is we created a strategy around wanting to roll up companies in the very early stages of the health food marketplace. Like a lot of early stage businesses, it was lots of players in a fragmented market. It sounds like, in some respects, what's old is new again. If you look at the artificial intelligence space, that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. Thousands of small companies behaving like 7-year-olds playing soccer. Everyone chasing the ball. There's a field out there. It doesn't have much white, there aren't many marks on it. People aren't in their lane because there's no lanes yet. So the health food marketplace in the 90s was very similar to that. A lot of $5, $10, $15, $20 million brands, mom and pop shops, people making things in their kitchen and being like, hey, people like my rice cake, so I'm going to go into the rice cake business. So we identified a handful of companies, 3 companies in particular, that were relatively small brands that were available for sale. We entered into contracts to buy these 3 companies, but we didn't have the cash to do so. The contracts we entered into required us to take the company public. So today, a special purpose acquisition corporation is really, and we've had them for a couple of years, probably about a decade now, that they come in and out of favor. They're really financing vehicles. You create a SPAC, which is not an operating company. You take it public. You find a company to buy, an operating business. You buy it. You do a reverse merger, and then the operating company becomes the reporting company. We did something similar. We identified companies to buy, needed to go public to buy them because they wanted to get some tradable stock, and we needed to raise the cash and give them tradable stock. We wanted to be able to go about using stock to affect the roll-up strategy. So we knew that we'd have to pay some cash to buy up these $5 and $20 million brands, but we didn't want to have to use all cash. We wanted to actually use stock, partially to be able to go into the basement and print our currency, and part of it to be able to give early stage founders liquid stock and induce them to and incentivize them to actually want to bring their business to our holding company and stay. This was not designed to be an exit strategy for most of these businesses. It was really designed to help bring them into a corporate umbrella, underneath a corporate umbrella, to allow them to accelerate their brand, their manufacturing and marketing, and not have to deal with all the corporate administration, which was my job. We put a lot of this notion of shared services. We were pretty early in that idea of like accounting and finance and treasury and legal, human resources, all of those corporate administrative functions. We became the central source and were the shared service for our effectively an array of subsidiary companies. So after we went public and raised about $4 million, we spent $3 million in cash to buy these 3 small companies and gave them a chunk of stock in addition. And then a couple of months later, a large Fortune 500 company made available their $45 million a year health food business. It was like it was something that came along in an acquisition that they had done. They considered it non-core to their supermarket business. They wanted to spin it off. We made a $25 million bid for this $45 million revenue company and won. And then we had a scramble to try to find $25 million.
What was that like? I mean, I imagine you'd had a
It
competent
was
investment banker, but
it was insane.
yeah,
We had $1 million tangible net worth and we were looking to raise $25 million. And my investment bankers were magicians. I'm not going to take too much credit for someone else's magic. They took our strategy and were able to help us package it into a set of projections that said this little $5 million a year company is going to buy $45 million of revenue. It'll have $50 million and about $5 million of EBITDA in the first day post-closing.
apologies.
And so we were able to take that financial model and put it in front of sophisticated investors who were willing to back the company. So it was a combination of about $7 million of equity and about $18 million of senior and subordinated debt. The biggest chunk was subordinated from insurance companies and the like who underwrote, bonds with ridiculously high interest rates. And we were happy to have it. And we knew that we had sufficient cash flow because we actually, there was so much history in the company that we were buying. The company was 50 years old when we bought it. So there was a lot of history. It was inside of a Fortune 500 company for a couple of years. The books and records were clean. The systems were clean. They agreed to continue to maintain inventory accounting, inventory control, accounts receivable management for a period of about 9 months. For a fee, they handled a lot of the accounting and reporting and management functions while we were putting in an ERP system and getting our sea legs underneath us. They were continuing to help shepherd a lot of the administrative functions of the business while we were catching up with ourselves. So, which was amazing because Fortune 500 companies will do stuff like that, trying to acquire a business from another smaller company. That never happens. You're on your own, which is why the rule of thumb is that when you buy another business, you're normally buying a company that's between 5 and 20 times smaller than you. It's very rare to buy something 10 times larger.
How did you guys, I mean, investment banking is usually pretty competitive. It's somewhat a commodity service in some degrees. How did you guys find those magicians?
This was a relationship between our CEO and the managing director at the investment bank, that there was a pre-existing relationship. So we didn't do a competitive bake-off. We had a supportive investment bank by the way, they had just spun out of Drexel. They were young and hungry as well. So they were not the investment bank that took us public. That was a different bank. That was a bank that bank would not have been able to accomplish the larger financing that we were doing for the $25 million deal to buy Hain. So fortunately, that was a pre-existing relationship, and the managing director for that bank came onto our board and was really supportive of the company on an ongoing basis and became our go-to banker for a decade.
That's really cool. That's old school relationship building.
Yeah, there was no way it was happening without them.
And just as a tangent a little bit, but could you give maybe some perspective or considerations for founders that might be looking to exit within maybe 3 to 7 years? Like, is an investment banker a good idea, or how best would they be thinking about that?
There's a couple things baked into that question. One of them is kudos to anyone who's thinking about exiting 3 to 5 years or 7 years in advance and actually starting to put some brain power against that process. I do a lot of work in exit planning for more mature companies, and always banging the drum with early stage companies to enter their business with the end in mind and really be clear about why they're in business, what they're trying to accomplish, what their exit price is going to be. It's like buying a stock for 10 and saying, I'm going to sell it or at least reevaluate it when it gets to 14. If I could pick up 4 points, that's great. Knowing that going in, having a sell price when you go in is really good discipline, and knowing what business you're in, who's likely to want to buy you, why would they buy you, what are you offering to them that isn't consistent, that represents something that's different than what they do and like would matter to them. Because a lot of early stage technology companies imagine that they're going to sell their business to one of the fabulous five. That could be true. You might sell your business to Meta or to Google or to Amazon, and if you do, that's fabulous. But you're not selling your economics. They don't care that you have $1 million or $2 million or $5 million or $50 million of ARR. That's not what they're buying. They're buying capabilities. They're buying your patents. They're buying your intellectual property. They might be buying a customer relationship or a vendor relationship. It's not likely, but possible. A lot of my successful exits have been based upon being really clear about the capabilities that my company had and being crystal clear about who wanted them. Because then the economics don't really matter as much. There's no good reason for a company to pay 5 times revenue and, 500 times earnings for my little financial services company, except we were competing with them in the market and we were beating them every day. So that was the motivation for that particular transaction, was if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. We kept winning in the market and they got tired of competing with us, so they actually bought us to take us off the playing field. But we knew that. We positioned ourselves in that way. And in fact, we auctioned the company went through a process with Goldman as our banker, went through a process for about a year, and intentionally did not send the book to our largest competitor. Bids came in, they didn't meet our requirement, and then we went back to our largest competitor and they paid much more than the best offer we got from the market. But it was all very well thought out and very well, the process was really well managed. So my advice to founders who are thinking about, starting and scaling a company and then start to think about the exit process is put time and attention against what capabilities you have that likely buyers would be willing to buy for a premium, and start to build a relationship with those companies early, because that partially answers the question about investment bankers. If you actually identify a small set, 1 or maybe 2 or 3 companies who could be viable buyers of your business, you may want or need an investment banker to help you manage the transaction, but you're not necessarily engaging them to find you the deal. If you find your own deal, if you are very clear about the handful of folks that you would want to bring the company to and actually send the information and send the book to, you're probably not paying top dollar for that investment banker. Because they're not finding the deal. If they are, if you don't know who should buy you, then you and your banker have a lot of work to do, and the banker is going to want to be compensated for actually identifying and finding within their own network who the best buyers are.
I think that's really helpful nuance there. That oftentimes isn't shared or common knowledge. So appreciate that, Neil.
Sure.
And I think that segues pretty nicely into a framework that you guys promote of the strategy choice cascade. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the strategy cascade is a tool that I use. It's courtesy of a man named Roger Barton, who had been the dean at the Rotman School at the University of Toronto for many years. He was a founder at Monitor, and he worked with A.G. Lafley, who is the CEO at Procter & Gamble once upon a time, to develop this approach. I've become a disciple, and I really like the way that the framework behaves, because it's really it's easy for people to understand. It's not that easy to implement. It takes a while to actually pull it together, but it's actually once it exists, it's fairly straightforward to build, the strategy cascade. It takes a lot of work to get it right, but when you're done with it, it is literally a one-page business plan. It is one piece of paper. There's a lot underneath it, but it's literally, if you want to get people on the same page, this is literally a PowerPoint page that you can put in front of your entire team, your entire company, every constituent. And it focuses really on 5 specific elements that enter into any business strategy. What's your aspiration? Why are you in business? Is Simon Sinek's why, which is really at the root of corporate culture. When people talk about corporate culture all the time, what term I don't love because it's not a well-defined term, but we could spend a lot of time talking about culture. Where to play, combined with how to win. So what marketplace are you going to play in, and what are your differentiations to be able to win in that marketplace? What are your capabilities? What do you have to have in place to enable your where to play and how to win? What are you actually going to do to enable that? And what management systems will support it? If you can identify those 5 things, you will have a clear and coherent strategy, which is going to drive customer behavior, which is really what strategy is supposed to do. I joke that that strategic planning is an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. Planning, to borrow from Dr. Martin, planning is a list of things that we're going to do with our resources. I'm going to build this factory. I'm going to hire these people. I'm going to build this product. I plan. Strategy is a set of choices that I make that compels my customers to desired action. But it's hard because I don't control my customers, and I don't control the competitors who are going to observe what I do and my customers do and figure out their own way to try to compete with us. So planning is actually very comfortable and very easy. We can all plan because we own the checkbook. We got the pencil. Strategy is hard because I'm trying to induce Stephen to do something that serves him and me. I desire that Steve buys my products at a price that allows me to have a reasonable margin. How am I going to induce Steve to buy that product from me instead of that product or a similar product from someone else? And that's where having clear aspiration, clarity about where to play, clarity about how you win and what your differentiations are super important.
I think that's just great perspective for anyone. What is the difference in implementing that framework if you're an established company versus a more of an earlier stage company?
In my experience, there's no meaningful difference. I tend to use this framework repeatedly, and I'm a big believer in having a strategic evaluation as part of my quarterly process. Monthly is fine, but I think it's a little bit too frequent. But revisiting your overall strategic framework on a quarterly basis, reviewing at the same time, I make my competitive assessment and my who should buy my company assessment part of my quarterly process as well. It's like, a quarter doesn't go by where you're not like, what did we do to try to improve our capabilities so that Google wants to buy us? That should be part of your kind of month end, quarter end, like what a review of where we've been and where we are and where we're going. I think the other thing that I love about this framework and about the process is every business is on an S-curve. Every business kind of goes through the life cycle of rising. If they have a good business, it tends to grow and kind of rise for a period of time and then plateau and then tends to diminish. And that's true of products. It's true of companies. It's true of almost everything that has a life cycle. The nice part about corporate life cycles as opposed to human life cycles is that when you get to that point of diminishing returns, you can get off your current S-curve and go find another one where you can drop down to the beginning of the growth curve again, revitalize your approach, revitalize your strategy. That's actually where I think a huge opportunity is for a lot of companies that reach maturity. Like and I think it's an advantage that outsiders bring where I don't have, as an outsider, I'm allowed to and encouraged to focus on growth and focus on challenging assumptions and sacrificing sacred cows if it's necessary. So looking at a business very objectively and saying whether what we're doing is serving us and serving our customers, or whether it's time to start doing something differently. And it's one of the things I find fascinating about the land we're in right now with artificial intelligence is it's forcing a lot of traditional businesses and functions within lots of businesses to revisit how they do what they do, with an emphasis toward automation, workflow rationalization, and rethinking the way work is being done. And I just think it's a huge opportunity for a lot of existing SaaS software companies to think about how to bring artificial intelligence automation capabilities to put their SaaS on steroids.
You mentioned coming in as an outsider and then getting up to speed. Are there common blind spots that you see, or is there a process for founders that they can implement to even start to think about how to ID their potential blind spots?
I think growth requires discipline. It requires cash. It requires a focus on, from a financial standpoint, on cash and cash flow. I think a lot of early stage companies tend to focus too hard on trying to build to profitability and trying to build to cash flow break even. I think book profitability for early stage companies should not be a priority. I think cash and cash flow should be their priority. I think organizing your business around the right customer contracts, being really attentive to the accounting rules and around revenue recognition, having a good accounting system so you're actually measuring things and measuring the right things. Start your business with good data governance. There are a lot of sort of baseline things that seem like, oh, we'll get, unfortunately, a lot of it's sort of boring accounting administrative stuff. They're like, I'll get around to it later when I'm bigger. I'll start right. It makes such a big difference to try to have good data and good information available to measure your business against your goals and objectives. I think it's crucial to the alignment process that you have to keep your business leadership needs to have clear understanding of how their business is operating. And the only way to really be clear about that is to reflect your operations and your accounting records and pay attention to what those historical reports are teaching you.
Certainly.
So I think the blind spot that I see and that I've experienced is a focus on like the wrong metrics and the wrong profitability and performance metrics, and focusing on the metrics that a larger, more mature company would pay attention to, where for earlier stage companies, it's all about liquidity. It's all about current ratio, and negotiate with your vendors to get more time to pay. Even if it costs you a little more money, even if cost of goods goes up by a point or two, if you can get a point or two extra from paying your bills in 90 days instead of 25 days, take advantage of the 90-day payment terms. Those sorts of things will allow you to stretch the early stage capital that you attract and not have to go back for more until you're actually able to take on more equity at a materially higher valuation. So for most early stage companies, there's no debt availability to consider. Equity is, and typically either common or preferred equity is what you have to sell to fund the business until you have enough history of positive cash flow and the ability to predict your performance reasonably well into the future. You're not likely to become viable as a borrower. So in the early stages, my focus with companies is on the work that you do see with product market fit, obviously enormously important. Most venture style investors are not interested in funding companies until they have some amount of product market fit, some amount of recurring revenue, some contracts in place that gives us some clarity and some visibility into the likelihood that revenue is going to continue. Once that's established, then it's all about running fast. It's really about having enough cash to be able to move quickly to take your early stage success and your early product market fit and decide how to magnify it. And that's a hard problem because, do you try to get larger share of wallet within your existing customer base? Do you want to try to, pursue a vertical or two? You want to try to go pursue multiple verticals and be a horizontal software or a horizontal provider? Do you want to be in multiple geographies? You want to be in multiple countries? There's this whole array of choices that founders and business leaders need to make about what's the most effective way to scale.
Right.
And you need to be able to sort of work through those possibilities and those options and map them out and probably project them with financials to be able to get some sense of where are the best places to put my resources and how long will my resources last and what valuation is likely to occur if I'm successful in going down this particular pathway. And will that valuation support raising more capital at a higher value before I run out of money?
All very worthwhile considerations, which frankly, I think most people miss on that planning or just even the projection phase of that consideration.
I think it's really important to quantify your choices. You could brainstorm and use your gut to develop those choices. You can have whatever array of possible directions that you want to go down, but doing the hard math around really testing your assumptions and really being very precise in the way that you frame your projections and the modeling out where you think you could go. We all know that financial models are estimates and based upon assumptions, and the only thing I know about financial models is that reality will differ. But if you're disciplined in the way that you model this, you'll very often find that the resource allocation, that is the choices that you're going to make about what aspects of the market to penetrate and at what time, you just have a lot more confidence around what you're going to do. And very often I find that you're not doing just one thing or the other thing or the third thing. What I find is that we're usually deciding to do the first thing for a period and then do the second thing. Like the choices that bubble up to the top that like we should do this. We've looked at 50 things and we've gotten down to 3. You're probably going to do those 3 things. You're just not going to do them all at once.
Right.
It doesn't mean, but a lot of the best ideas usually have merit and they're worth doing. You just have to figure out how to sequence them.
In terms of just that sequence, how do you even approach that?
It's usually a function of what can be accomplished. Again, I'm assuming in an early stage environment with limited resources, the name of the game is about establishing credibility and quick wins. So the prioritization of the 3 ideas, which one is likely to establish the best response from the market? And obviously you're defining response based upon how many units I'm going to sell to how many people for what price and what margin. Like, because at early stage, you're really trying to be very clear about what does this accomplish for the business. It's not necessarily a dollars and cents question. It's not necessarily about maximizing revenue. It might be about maximizing your client's outcome and the results that they experience from using the tool, the software, the product, whatever it may be. What does it mean to your business if a prestigious client has a really good experience and they're willing to allow you to publish that? Would you trade off some amount of your margin in exchange for an agreement to publish a white paper and with their name on it, getting them to publish a white paper or to put your logo on their website? Those are the kind of things that, really could make a big difference in slingshotting a business forward that a lot of founders don't even think about because they're thinking about ARR and they're focusing on I need to get to $100,000. Yeah, you do, but maybe you don't have to get there this way at this pace. Maybe you can get there in a different way and bypass 100 and get right to 250.
I mean, that's fascinating and really creative marketing right there. That oftentimes overlooked, as you said. So I think that's really interesting. Could you tell us a little bit? Obviously, you've seen a lot of different S curves in your career, but how do you, as an advisor, help organizations that largely have established means and methods and processes navigate what is, I guess, for lack of better terms, called a transformation? There's obviously friction involved there. So how do you manage that?
I view that as mostly a change management problem. I think the biggest issue about getting companies to transition from what they've been doing to what they could be doing or should be doing is fighting the biggest competitor in the market, which is that guy named status quo. It's so challenging to get people to stop doing what they've been doing, particularly if it's been working, if they've been making money. What I think motivates most folks to call me if they're losing ground on the S-curve, if they're starting to flatten out and diminish. The ones that want to engage are those that are like, I want help in jumping to the next S-curve. I want to get back to the bottom of an S-curve so where there's room to grow and room to move. I'm at the top and I'm not going to change that. Like we've experimented and we've tried to figure out how to pivot off of where we are. And the fact is, we probably can't. We now need to move to a completely different space. And, again, the artificial intelligence regime is a really good example of SaaS software companies that have been successful in providing support for their clients and their clients' business processes are now faced with the next new thing is going to come along and cannibalize your business. You have no choice but to now change and adopt new automation tools, new automation methodologies, new workflows. You have to literally be willing to throw out a lot of what has worked for you and your clients in the past and be willing to boldly say, I'm going to refactor the way my system works. It doesn't mean refactoring your underlying system may be fine. You may have to layer capabilities on top of it. You may have to very objectively look at some things that this system does that is not optimized any longer. That workflow and that mechanism is now obsolete, and be willing to accept the obsolescence and be like, okay, I'm going to now either someone else is going to obsolete me or I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to cannibalize it myself. I recommend that second thing because you have a much better chance of a good long life if you're willing to acknowledge that it's time for a significant change.
Certainly. Well, and at least have a little bit more of a longevity in terms of that change management internally relative to the market dictating it.
The advantage that companies have if they have some maturity and they have some clients and they have relationships with, good relationships with their clients, it's such a great opportunity to sit down with your clients and have honest, hard conversations about what could we do for you that would make your life better the way we made your life better when you first hired us. For most software companies, you won the work and you got engaged because your software was actually going to make their life better than what it was replacing. You might be replacing Excel and you were a purpose-built solution for some function that Excel doesn't do as well as your software does. Go have those conversations with your clients.
Sure.
Be like, if you really have good relationships with your clients and your partners, use those relationships to really dig in, because I think most people's clients are struggling with how to leverage the new automation opportunities and AI. No one was born knowing this stuff. I mean, and it's moving very, very quickly. And if your company is trying to figure out how to infuse AI into your software, at that same moment, your clients are trying to figure out how to infuse AI into their business, including your software. Everyone's facing the same question, so go answer it for them.
Well, I think that honest and direct feedback could be invaluable, like you're saying. So I think that's a great encouragement.
Once upon a time, one of my CEOs told me that you should never be surprised if you got fired. You should know your clients well enough to know that you're not doing it for them. Don't be surprised if they terminate your contract. So get close to your customers. And don't be afraid of having those hard conversations because they will generally really appreciate it. And if they don't, they were going to fire you anyway.
Great wisdom right there. Just final question, but what's general profile or what are the groups that you enjoy working with the most and what does that typically look like?
So I tend to work with different, companies throughout their life cycle. In early stage companies, it's a focus on product market fit and capital management, liquidity management, and helping people think through and trying to attract their next wet rounds of capital. For established growing companies, it tends to be finding the next rounds of capital and what form that should take and where the flexibilities are. Are you able to become a borrower? Could you be legitimate credit for a bank or a non-bank? Would you qualify for SBA financing, which is something that a lot of people overlook? And I've been successful in a couple of different places where if you're interested in acquiring real estate or you have the need to acquire fixed assets, the SBA program is amazing because the federal government backs the majority and guarantees the majority of the loans. So the lender is is exposed to 20% of the loan. 80% of the exposure is really absorbed by the SBA. So there are rules around it. It generally requires pretty complete collateral so that it's really good for fixed assets and really good for acquiring hard technology assets. It's much harder to support asset light and sort of intellectual property purchases. But if you're in a state where you have to acquire real estate, you have to stand up this any kind of manufacturing facility, or if you are interested in acquiring your own racks and servers and your own hard assets, the SBA functions as a really good tool to make debt capital available to businesses that otherwise probably wouldn't qualify for traditional bank financing.
It's a great overview that oftentimes is overlooked.
But a lot of my work with more mature companies tends to be oriented toward that 3 to 4 years of preparation for a valuable exit. For a lot of people who are I want to transition out of my business in the next few years, there's a lot of work to do to create optimal value of a company and of that asset for the owner or leadership team to be able to make sure that the management team who wants to stay with the business has a really good pathway so that when the owner or partners of a business want to sell to another company, the people who stay have a good career ahead of them, because most early stage and emerging businesses, and even businesses as they mature, if they've got a sound strategy and people really bought into the culture and the purpose and the meaning of the business, when the owner says, I want to, sell the company, for a lot of the people who work in that business, ideally that sale represents a new beginning for those who want to stay. But you have to structure that. It doesn't happen automatically.
Sure.
That's something that really needs time and attention. And if the business leadership and the ownership cares a lot about the folks who are in the business, and it's really, it is, a lot of companies behave like their families with and without the dysfunction, that if the owners really care about what happens to the business and the legacy and what it means, like people put a lot of time and attention and a lot of sweat and blood into their businesses, after they sell it, they still want it to be successful into the future. So that tends to be an area where I pay a lot of attention, because it requires a few years. It doesn't require a few months. When people come to me and say, I want to sell my business in the next couple of months, I'm like, God bless. You will be surprised that it takes a lot longer than a couple of months. You'll be disappointed, and you'll also probably be disappointed in the offers that you get, because unless you have prepared yourself for years to go about selling that business, your house is not going to sell for top dollar if you haven't spent the time to stage it.
Great analogy.
It's actually pretty straightforward, because it's a very valid analogy, and it's true that most people who want to sell their house believe it's worth more than the market will pay. Almost everybody who wants to sell their business will believe that it's worth more than the market believes it's worth. And so the work is actually in getting the market to pay you what you think your business is worth.
Sure. Well, a lot of staging is obviously required, and some strategic kind of Simon Sinek wisdom alongside that as well.
Yeah, it is pretty straightforward. The deal process is difficult. It's emotional. It's for a lot of people who look to exit their business. They struggle with it. The notion of seller's remorse is very real. That people are uncertain about what they want to do. Very often uncertain about what they want to do next. They don't have they're sort of running away from rather than running to. So there's a lot of sort of psychology and getting people emotionally prepared to transition their business, which is one of the reasons it takes so long.
Sure. Well, and that's the human aspect that I don't think a lot of people touch on. So obviously, you've seen that a number of times.
Yeah, look, I think it's amazingly important. I've seen deals busted. I've seen founders go through the process and get all the way to the closing table and then not sign because at the very last minute they're like, I don't like the terms. I don't want to say mother may I don't want to, I thought I was going to sell the business and leave, but I don't want to. I want to stay. They don't want me to stay. I've seen so much of it is just the human factors and the emotional stuff that goes on. And it gets very intense as you get down to closing.
Almost every single time.
Almost every single time. It's just unless people are very, very clear in their own mind about what they're trying to accomplish and be very purposeful about it and be very clear about the outcome that they're looking for. And if they can get to that outcome, and they're clear about what and why they're doing it, then it's easy. Then you don't have all of the misgivings and regrets and all of the what ifing that happens if you're not clear. It's part of the role that I play is to trying to bring people to that, help them achieve that clarity. I don't bring them clarity. I ask a lot of questions and try to cause them to become clear.
Well, that's great diligence before the diligence. Yes. What would be like some common pitfalls, like to avoid like the shiny object syndrome? Like, what are some metrics or criteria that help identify, at least to a second level, what makes something more compelling versus another opportunity when it comes to acquisition?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue, I can't generalize to the nature of an acquisition because so much of it depends on context. I think a lot of the work that I do on acquisitions is, and even in the workshop, focuses on the integration lifecycle. The acquisition lifecycle is a 6 or 7 step process. It's kind of known and understood. I think the biggest pitfall that I've seen companies make is to wait until they're closing before they start the integration process. I start the integration process when I've identified and start to engage with a target. Like as I'm doing due diligence and going through that 2 or 3 month cycle of assessing the books and the business and all of the details around legal financial diligence, I'm doing integration planning that entire time so that after you close, most of your integration plan is already in place. You will not have executed it. You'll not have put it into action, but the entire plan is there. You know what systems you're going to keep, what people you're going to move, who stays, who goes, who gets promoted. What does everyone's compensation scheme look like? All of that has to be decided way in advance. So I think a lot of acquisitions fail for 2 reasons. One is overpaying, which is the shiny object problem, and you pay too much, and then you could never recover the cost that, what it costs you to get to acquire the asset. And the other is to fail integration. If you don't overpay and you do successful integration, you really bring the new people and the new business into your existing operation pretty seamlessly over the course of about a year, the acquisition will pay for itself in 3 years.
Well,
and you pay down the debt in 3 years.
Sure. When you're also kind of, I guess, underlining the importance of having a really well-defined projection model, which if you're doing that integration work up in the front, you're going to have a better handle on what that's going to look like, at least at a general parameter.
Absolutely. And very often that, in larger deals, that model is what's going to sell the financing. It's what we talked about earlier about Hain. It was investors believing the forecast. It was the forecast being credible and having enough information to be able to go to lenders and say, this is how the business is going to behave after the deal is done. And if you believe it and they believe it, and it mostly comes to pass, you can raise a lot of capital to support your.
Better terms or what have you. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So that would be a big part of the acquisition assessment is a valuation question, and then how do we actually make sure that the thing that we're buying behaves at least as well under my ownership as it did before, and ideally a whole lot better, but no worse than the same as it was before.
Well, your workshop offering is something that we've not heard at Solus Partners, so I think that'd be highly valuable for a number of different groups. Appreciate
Excellent.
your review on that.
Love that.
What's the best way people could get in contact with you?
The best contact is through email. So it's Neil at carltonadvisorsllc.com, which I imagine will be in the notes to the podcast. Yeah, the email is the best way. I think the other thing that I wanted to note is a lot of early stage companies and even more mature companies that have never done acquisitions don't tend to think about them as part of their business plan. They really just think about internal growth and organic growth, and I'm going to add this, I'm going to add marketing, I'm going to add sales, I'm going to add products. But this is there's a marketplace where there are a lot of companies that are available for sale. There are millions of companies that are going to be sold in the next decade. Millions. There are so many businesses that are owned by boomers and Gen Z and Gen X that are going to, not Gen Z, but Gen X and even millennials that are now going to transition out of their businesses. So if there is a market you want to enter, a product line you want, a supplier you might be interested in buying, a competitor who you think is really talented, or a company that kicks your ass in the market that might be run by a 74-year-old who's definitely had enough, pay attention to those opportunities, because you might be able to accelerate your growth path and your success a great deal. And so I give a 2-day workshop for executive teams and actually teach them about the acquisition lifecycle and about the process that helps open people's eyes to the possibilities of being able to acquire businesses that would allow them to accelerate their growth. So I really encourage people to consider learning about the acquisition lifecycle and the acquisition process to understand how it behaves, so that they can consider it in their strategy planning and in the way that they go about thinking about growing their own business.
Well, that's a great just opportunity then to at least have a little bit more of an understanding around strategic M&A. So I appreciate that ad.
Sure. Yeah. So I think my clients find it very valuable, and it's a great way to at least consider whether acquiring other businesses should be in the array of possibilities for an earlier stage business. If you have access to capital, then it could be a way to really accelerate progress.
Well, great. Well, Neil, I can't thank you enough. And I really
My pleasure, man.
all the thoughts and stuff. The podcast or that recorded chat on YouTube was awesome with the Black Swan stuff. So
Well, good.
I love all that stuff.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. All right, Steve.
Have a great rest of your day, Neil.
You too. Thank you. Be well.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye now.